Every day on the streets, we cross paths with countless strangers. But do we ever stop to think about what truly lies behind their carefree faces? Today's story will make you ponder the chilling secrets that may be hidden in the depths of an ordinary person's soul, someone who does not attract much attention. The morning of August 18th, 2018, found 36-year-old Christina Kraft with an unbearable headache. The woman barely opened her eyes and was surprised to find herself lying on the floor of her own apartment. Despite all her efforts, she could not understand what had happened the previous night after a few glasses at the bar. Her memories were cut off at some point, and Christina had no recollection of how she got home. This seemed extremely strange to her, because she definitely had not drunk so much alcohol that she would lose the ability to control reality. However, Christina comforted herself with the fact that at least she woke up in the safety of her own home and not in some sinister place. She firmly decided to figure out what could have caused such memory lapses and poor health. The woman was convinced that someone had slipped something into her drink. During an examination of the apartment, it turned out that some valuable items were missing: designer handbags, shoes, jewelry, credit cards. Christina realized the obvious. She had been robbed. The perpetrators had probably drugged her with some substances to make her lose her vigilance. Fear gripped Christina because the robber could return, having a duplicate of the keys. Because of this, she was afraid to stay alone in her own home. A sense of danger did not leave her for several days, until she dared to go out into the city. And even after that, anxiety haunted Christina until her very death. Christina lived in Ardmore, a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA, rich in historical heritage. Christina was used to the bustling nightlife, into which she immersed herself headlong. Christina Kraft was born on July 11th, 1981, into a close-knit and strong family. Unfortunately, in 1990, when the girl was only 9, her mother passed away. Her father raised the children on his own for a long time, until he remarried. The stepmother brought her own children from previous relationships into the family, so the family almost doubled. After graduating from high school, Christina got a job as a waitress at a casino on the coast. Of course, she aspired to more, but this experience was invaluable. With her striking appearance and charm, Christina had always dreamed of popularity, working as a model in front of cameras and gracing the covers of glossy magazines. In the summer of 2003, while working at the casino, Christina caught the attention of a successful investor. The fact is that about $1 million had been invested in the infrastructure of the coast to create a prestigious resort. This attracted wealthy entrepreneurs, among whom was Alex Cicotelli, a banker who became the love of Christina's life. Their meeting was a true gift of fate. The young people fell in love with each other at first sight, instantly found a common language, and immersed themselves in the relationship. Christina and Alex's relationship lasted 14 years. Although they lived together as a real family, Christina was in no hurry to have children, as she did not abandon her dreams of a modeling career and the pages of fashion magazines. Alex fully supported his beloved's ambitions, and soon it began to bear fruit. Even as a child, Christina received offers for several modeling jobs, and later they began to pour in like a cornucopia. The girl's photographs graced the pages of such popular publications as Maxim, Vanity Fair, and many others. She represented L'Oreal, Victoria's Secret, MAC, and a number of other well-known brands. The more photo shoots Christina did, the faster her popularity and the number of new orders grew. But despite this, her cherished dream remained to be photographed for Playboy magazine. Christina strove to stand alongside the most famous models of this iconic publication, considering it the pinnacle of her career ascent. At that time, Playboy was indeed one of the most influential magazines in its field. In 2005, it even launched its own popular reality show. Christina became one of thousands of applicants who sent their photos to the editors. And so, in 2009, she received a phone call with incredible news. Christina was chosen as Girl of the Week. This meant that her photos would be published on the pages of Playboy, along with a short biography, as part of a special contest. On May 4th, 2009, a photo shoot took place, which went brilliantly. Of course, this was not yet the full embodiment of Christina's dream, because she wanted to get on the cover and spread. But even this small success was a significant step towards the cherished goal. The photo shoot opened the doors to the world of Playboy for the promising model. Since then, Christina has attended many social events, communicated with Hollywood celebrities, and Hugh Hefner himself honored her with his attention. However, in the hierarchy of Playboy girls, she was still on the lower rungs. But Christina was confident that very soon she would stand alongside the models representing the legendary brand. Unfortunately, Christina faced a serious obstacle on the way to her dream: age. At the time of the shoot for Playboy, she was already 26 years old, which by the magazine standards was considered quite a respectable age. The chances of real success were melting before her eyes. In the end, Christina did not manage to achieve the coveted triumph. Her modeling career ended as swiftly as it began. But the ambitious beauty was not going to give up. She had many ideas and aspirations. She decided to realize herself in another field, not even suspecting how the connection with Playboy could affect these plans. Despite its tremendous popularity, the scandalous magazine had a rather ambiguous reputation in media circles. Due to her collaboration with Playboy, famous brands and publications began to refuse Christina. She attended the most prestigious auditions in the USA, but despite the approving feedback about her appearance, she never got the jobs. At the same time, Christina realized that popularity also had a downside. After the publication in the magazine, she acquired stalkers. Concerned Alex insisted that his beloved end her modeling career and move to the quiet suburb of Ardmore, where they would be safer. But, as it turned out, absolutely safe places do not exist. Even here, Christina met a tragic fate. On August 21st, 2018, Alex went on a business trip to New York, leaving Christina alone in the apartment. For him, it was a usual routine. He often went on business trips. That same evening, Alex called Christina to wish her good night, but she did not answer. Knowing what an active lifestyle his beloved led, the man did not attach much importance to this, deciding to call back in the morning. The next morning, Alex tried to call Christina again, but her mobile phone remained relentlessly silent. Despite the desire to hear the girl's voice, work matters required attention. It was necessary to complete all meetings before returning to Ardmore. Dozens of calls went unanswered until the evening. Such behavior was extremely uncharacteristic of Christina. Finally, Alex realized that something bad had happened. He was overcome by an oppressive feeling of anxiety, so he had to put all his affairs aside. The man rushed to their apartment to find out why Christina had been out of touch for a whole day. Arriving at the place around 9 o'clock in the evening, he tried to open the door, but the key did not fit. Alex hoped that the door was blocked from the inside. Christina still did not answer the calls or knocks on the door, so Alex had to call the police. The patrol officers were in no hurry to respond to the call because the area was affluent and residents often called about trifles. But as soon as the policeman checked the address, his opinion instantly changed. Just 4 days ago, he had accepted a statement from Christina about a robbery in her apartment. The likelihood of a repeated attack led to chilling thoughts. The policeman recalled that the thief could return, and now the young woman may have been the victim of an encounter with him. He immediately sent a patrol to the specified address, which found the bewildered Alex waiting for law enforcement officers near the house. The door had to be broken down. Beyond the threshold, it became obvious that something terrible had happened here. The rooms were in an eerie disarray. The furniture was overturned and broken. But the most terrifying sight awaited the police in the bedroom. There was blood everywhere. On the bed, under a soaked sheet, the patrol officers found Christina. By that time, rigor mortis had already set in on Christina. Her face was disfigured beyond recognition. Cuts and bruises were found on her body. The model's nose was literally pressed into her skull. Both eye sockets were broken. The bones of her face were smashed as if someone had jumped on it with both feet. Undoubtedly, the attack was committed by a person in a state of extreme psychosis or rage. Or the attacker was determined to destroy the beauty of the victim. On the neck, there were traces of strangulation with a foreign object, probably clothing or a power cable. However, it was never found at the scene of the massacre. Of course, in such cases, the victim's partner becomes the first suspect. Therefore, the police decided to talk to Alex. All this time, he was waiting near the apartment, gripped by anxiety. When he was told the terrible news, the man fell into a state of shock. The patrol officers took him to the police station for questioning, but after an hour and a half, they realized that Alex had nothing to do with what had happened. The man sincerely mourned his beloved. His ironclad alibi was confirmed instantly, so the law enforcement officers ran out of suspects. All this happened in one of the quietest and safest areas of the city. So it was necessary to immediately start the search for the criminal who had killed the young woman with such cruelty. The police believed that the key to solving the case could be the victim's statement about the robbery filed 4 days ago. The police were convinced that these two incidents were connected. At the time of the murder, the investigation into the robbery was ongoing. Detectives received CCTV footage and began to analyze it carefully. Previously, investigators had spoken with Christina. Joint efforts made it possible to reconstruct the chain of events that preceded the unpleasant incident in the apartment. It turned out that on Friday, August 17th, the girl went to a bar in the city center. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, Christina returned home. She was driven by a young African-American taxi driver, about 30 years old, with a neat beard and haircut. It was possible to establish data about the car in which the model arrived. On the footage from the cameras near the apartment, the police found frames where Christina loses consciousness as soon as she gets out of the taxi. After that, the driver dragged her into the back seat. Apparently, he took Christina's keys and headed to the apartment. There the man stayed for over an hour before leaving the building carrying a heavy box. It was noticeable that it was not easy for him to drag it. Later, the taxi driver woke Christina up, helped her get out of the car, and escorted her to the apartment. Then he just drove away. Having received these frames, law enforcement officers made them public and appealed to the public. If someone recognizes the perpetrator, please provide information about him. At the same time, investigators began to examine the details of the victim's life. It turned out that Christina was very active on social networks. Thanks to the noticeable digital footprint, the police managed to find out about an incident in 2016. It was even written about in the news. At that time, the police were called to one of the expensive restaurants in Manhattan, where a visitor had quarreled with the manager. It turned out that Christina had hit the establishment's employees several times. She was even arrested. In the end, Alex sorted out the problems. The model was released on probation for 6 months. Investigators checked the version about the revenge of the offended restaurant employee, but quickly discarded it. After moving to Ardmore, Christina could not get used to a quiet life for a long time. She was accustomed to parties and get-togethers. Gradually delving into the girl's biography, the police came to her debut in Playboy. Among all the information found, this lead turned out to be the most significant. After all, models often become victims of stalking. Christina had several accounts registered on various platforms related to the modeling business. It was quite likely that it was through this data that the criminal had found his victim. At the same time, the police tracked Christina's bank card statements. It turned out that on the evening after the murder, they were used in a grocery store near the apartment. It was possible to establish that the cards were used by the same driver who was recorded by the cameras. He was identified. The unscrupulous taxi driver's name was Andre Melton. He had a solid criminal history. Andre was considered a rather dangerous criminal. The young man was prone to violence and had repeatedly attacked women. Detectives quickly obtained a search warrant for his home, as well as an arrest warrant for burglary. Unfortunately, when the police arrived at the scene, Andre was not there. He had fled. However, law enforcement officers entered his home and conducted searches, during which they found most of the items stolen from the victim. But the police were no longer worried about this. It was necessary to detain the dangerous criminal and prove his involvement in the murder, which the investigators had no doubt about. At that time, the autopsy report was ready. The expert found 22 broken facial bones in Christina. There were practically no uninjured areas left on her head. Everything that was not broken or crushed was covered with bruises from the beating. Of course, according to the specialist's conclusion, the case was qualified as murder. Given the rage with which the criminal acted, the attack was regarded as intentional and possibly had a personal motive. Continuing to study the footage from the surveillance cameras, the police discovered another suspicious man. Around 3 o'clock on the night before Christina's murder, she again got into the camera lens in the company of a stranger. He was also African American, about the same age as Andre, but clearly was not the taxi driver who had robbed the model. Both entered the apartment building, but neither of them came out. So how did the stranger leave the building? The only suspicious signal was a security system mark that at 5:20 in the morning, the balcony doors of the model's apartment opened and closed. Christina and her boyfriend lived on the first floor. Probably, the criminal could have left unnoticed through the balcony. This man was put on the wanted list. The success of the operation was largely facilitated by the high quality of the video recording, which allowed a detailed look at the face of the alleged killer. The footage was actively disseminated through the media. Andre was also wanted. It was assumed that he could have been in collusion with the murderer. As expected, journalists grabbed onto this story for the sake of sensational headlines. Notes about the disappearance of the Playboy model with the dirtiest assumptions began to appear in the newspapers. Alex, like Christina's parents, was extremely angry at this development, because the media circus turned the girl from a respectable, beautiful young woman into almost an escort and a stripper. Loved ones desperately tried to clear Christina's name in the media from provocative statements, seeking to dispel the stereotype that she was an indecent person. Despite all these problems, the published information had a positive impact on the investigation. On August 22nd, Andre Melton himself called the police station. Seeing how his photo was being shown on television along with the image of the alleged killer, he decided to clarify the situation. Andre was aware of the degree of responsibility for the murder and admitted that he had robbed Christina on August 18th, but insisted on his non-involvement in her death. At the same time, the taxi driver was not going to surrender to the authorities, fearing being charged with murder. The search for suspects continued until another taxi driver turned to the department. He told how, shortly before Christina's tragic death, he had driven her and an African-American man to the apartment at night. According to him, there was clearly a spark between them. Interestingly, Christina stopped the car right on the road, without using the app, and persistently asked to give her and her friend a ride to the apartment. Probably, she deliberately did not want to leave a mark in the application. Christina did not have cash, but her companion promised to pay when they arrived at the house. The African-American stranger confirmed this to the driver several times. He even assured that he would leave a $100 tip if the taxi driver waited for him outside for 15 minutes. The driver was convinced. Christina said that some men were harassing her on the street, and this stranger stood up for her and offered to help her get home. She was grateful to him. During the trip, the stranger behaved calmly, and Christina was somewhat alarmed. Of course, the taxi driver was deceived. No one came out of the apartment and gave him the money. In the end, the driver just drove away. On October 26th, another message was received at the station. According to a new witness, He was a ward mate with a man whose photo he saw in the news. This happened in a psychiatric hospital just a few days before Christina's death. As the witness said, the African-American patient of the clinic ended up there because of an attack on a woman. The aggressive man was kept in a psychiatric hospital for 3 days. According to the witness, a rather creepy conversation took place between them, during which the stranger confessed that he had already killed a woman and he liked to strangle. He described with delight that there was no better feeling than the convulsions of a body taking its last breath in life. The man who called was convinced that it was this patient who was in the house of the murdered Christina. All these clues were great news for the police. The detectives went to the clinic to find out the real name of the mentally ill man. Imagine their surprise and disappointment when it turned out that he called himself John Doe. Traditionally, this is how unidentified bodies are named. Not only did the clinic release a person who enjoys killing, but they also did not establish his identity. Other numerous violations in the work of the hospital were also revealed. It seemed that the investigation had reached a dead end again. But on August 29th, a breakthrough finally occurred. Ironically, this happened on the day of the funeral of 36-year-old Christina. Another man turned to the police, who admitted that he was a relative of the African-American guy recorded on the surveillance camera footage. He reported that it was a 31-year-old drug dealer, Jonathan Wesley Harris, who had a conviction for a particularly serious crime and was released only a month before the model's death. Unfortunately, the relatives did not know his exact whereabouts, but now the detectives at least knew for certain who to look for. The police called everyone who could know anything about this man. In the end, they managed to talk to the wanted man's sister. She told the investigators that Jonathan had left Philadelphia by bus. The suspect was heading to Pittsburgh. Law enforcement officials contacted the local police department and warned that a dangerous criminal was approaching their jurisdiction. According to the detectives' calculations, he was still on the way. So numerous Pittsburgh patrols went to the bus station in the hope of intercepting the killer. The entire territory was surrounded. When the bus arrived, 31-year-old Jonathan was the third to get off. The dangerous criminal was detained, after which he found himself in an interrogation room. When he was shown a photograph of the deceased model, Jonathan said that they had met in a bar. The couple struck up a conversation. According to the detainee, both were under the influence of alcohol and drugs. They quickly understood each other and chatted until the bar closed. Jonathan treated his friend to heavy forbidden substances, hoping that she would agree to intimacy with him as payment. This was also indicated by the fact that Christina went with him in a taxi to her home. However, in the apartment where the murder took place, she refused him and then refused to pay the bill of $1,200 for all the drugs that Jonathan had spent that evening. A verbal altercation broke out between them. Christina insisted that she had not asked to be treated because Harris had done it of his own free will, so she was not going to pay for anything. After that, he allegedly just left, leaving Christina heavily intoxicated but alive. This story sounded extremely implausible and in no way explained how all the bones of the model's face turned out to be broken. Why did she die of strangulation if no one else entered the apartment? An even bigger problem for Jonathan was the fact that no drugs were found in Christina's blood, only alcohol. Investigators made it clear that they did not believe his words and left the interrogation room to give the suspect time to think everything over. Amazingly, it worked. When the detectives returned, Jonathan confessed to the murder, but blamed Christina for everything. According to the man, they had intimate contact, but in addition to sex, he still demanded $1,200 for the drugs. Christina believed that sex was enough and said that she did not have that kind of money. Christina grabbed a bottle of wine and hit Jonathan on the head. He started bleeding. Confused, he hit Christina back and carried her to the bedroom. There, the model began to regain consciousness and screamed loudly. Because of this, Jonathan panicked even more. He realized that he could have problems with the law because of this incident. Under the influence of alcohol and drugs, The man tried to make Christina shut up, but she resisted. Then he twisted her, tied her up with pajama pants, and tied her to the bed to make resistance impossible. According to Jonathan's confession, after that, he calmed down and said that he wanted to untie Christina and just leave. Christina agreed, but it was a deception. As soon as she was freed, she immediately rushed to the door. Jonathan caught up with her and dragged her back onto the bed. Enraged, he began to hit Christina in the face again and again, inflicting more and more severe injuries with each blow, constantly repeating for her to be quiet. But Christina did not listen. In the end, he stopped when she ceased to make sounds. Then the suspect tried to find valuables in her apartment to compensate for his expenses for the evening. Jonathan began to panic because Christina was breathing very strangely. Although he did not find any special valuables, he still helped her turn over. Blood was flowing from the woman's mouth. She asked for a phone to call her father. Jonathan handed her the mobile phone, but saw that Christina was dialing 911. He decided that Christina was lying again and wanted to call for help. In a state of panic, the man attacked her and began to strangle her. According to him, he never finished the job. Jonathan stopped when Christina lost consciousness. He was convinced that she was still alive. The man covered Christina with a sheet because her face was a creepy sight that he could not look at. After that, Jonathan stole several items of clothing to change and get rid of the blood-stained things. As the police assumed, the suspect later left the apartment through the balcony. Despite the brutality of the massacre, the attacker insisted that he had simply panicked and initially had no intention of killing. Jonathan claimed that the aggression and panic were caused by the influence of drugs and alcohol, as well as Christina's refusal to pay for the substances. But a toxicological examination showed that there were no drugs in the murdered woman's body. No injuries from a broken bottle were found on Jonathan's head either, so his story continued to remain false. And although the detainee confessed to the murder, he considered it unintentional. This is exactly what his lawyers tried to prove, arguing that the man was to blame for the heavy drugs he had taken. It was not even about second-degree murder. They wanted to reduce the seriousness of the crime to manslaughter. In turn, the prosecution insisted that the story Jonathan told in the psychiatric hospital about how he likes to strangle and kill indicates the intentional nature of the massacre. It was not possible to establish his involvement in other murders, which the ward mate mentioned. In addition, Jonathan tried to escape, clearly intending to avoid responsibility, and lied about the motive because of drugs. The prosecution argued that even if his story were true, the defendant did not have to contact Christina at all, tie her up, or beat her. He could have just left, and there would have been no questions for him. In the end, the jury found Jonathan guilty of first-degree intentional murder, as well as kidnapping, escape, theft, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, as well as an additional 22.5 years for other charges. After the verdict was announced, the criminal was given the last word. He laconically explained that the sentence suited him. The victim's relatives and boyfriend continued to insist on the falsity of Jonathan's words. They did not believe that Christina was cheating on Alex. He himself was confident in her fidelity. Moreover, the girl had never been addicted to drugs. The absence of prohibited substances in her blood confirmed his words. Probably, the alcohol went to Christina's head, and Jonathan tried to take advantage of the situation by offering to help her get home. Then the woman tried to say goodbye to him, but he was against it, raped and killed her so that she would not turn him in to the police. The same robber who attacked Christina 4 days before her death was detained in December 2018. He was tried on other charges not related to her. The list was supplemented by burglary, embezzlement, and criminal encroachment on someone else's property. Andre Melton received a considerable term for his actions. Justice prevailed, but it still will not bring the girl back to life. The story of Christina Kraft is a tragic example of how unexpectedly the life of a young and promising person can be cut short. This chilling tale makes us think about the fragility of our existence and the importance of caution and vigilance in everyday life. Despite all the horror of the situation, the investigation into Christina's murder became a model of professionalism and perseverance of law enforcement agencies. Thanks to the painstaking collection of evidence, meticulous analysis of surveillance camera recordings, and thorough work with witnesses, the police managed to track down the killer and bring him to justice. This case also vividly illustrates the problem of sensational and sometimes biased coverage of such crimes in the media. Instead of sticking to the facts and supporting the deceased's loved ones, some media outlets resorted to spreading rumors and speculation, causing even more pain to Christina's relatives. The fate of Christina Kraft will forever remain a tragic reminder of the fragility of human life and the need to value every moment of it. At the same time, this story is evidence of the strength of justice and the inevitability of punishment for criminals, no matter how they try to avoid retribution. The bright memory of Christina will live forever in the hearts of her loved ones and all those who were struck by her untimely death. And although justice has been restored and the killer has been punished, it will never bring back the deceased or alleviate the suffering of her loved ones. But they can find at least a crumb of solace in the fact that the criminal will spend the rest of his days behind bars. So let this sad story be a reminder to each of us about the pricelessness of life, the importance of taking care of safety, and the need not to remain indifferent to the suffering of others. And let the bright image of Christina Kraft always be a symbol of beauty, fragility, and the delicacy of human existence for us. If this story interested you, and you want to learn more about the investigation of similar crimes, we invite you to subscribe to the YouTube channel Detective Brooks. There you will find a lot of informative content about the most high-profile criminal cases and the work of investigators. Join our community to stay up to date with the latest news and professional insights in the field of criminology and justice.